Hello, and welcome to Magic is Real, a podcast focused on the fascinating world of near-death experiences, spirit communication, and all things metaphysical and spiritual. The mission of this project is to share messages of hope and inspiration with others, and to spread the word that death is only an illusion. Thank you for being here with an open heart and mind. I wish you peace, light, and love always. Hello, Magic is Real listeners and family. Thank you so much for being here this week, this time, this episode. Today I have with me Nicole Kerr. How do you pronounce it? Kerr or Kerr?
Kerr.
I
Kerr.
actually, I had a feeling, and I actually meant to ask you ahead of time. Anyway, it's Nicole Kerr. And Nicole Kerr, who is she? She wrote the book You Are Deathless, which I am halfway through and genuinely like. And I'm only halfway through it because it takes me forever to read a book because I'm freelance and I have like 12 different jobs. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the lovely Nicole, whose book I am thoroughly enjoying. And I'm not just saying that because she's sitting right here. It's well written. It talks about not just the NDE, but about trauma, which I'm really interested in, how the body responds to trauma, the insights that she's learned. It's really about her spiritual journey, which is what lights me up. So I'm just going to tell you here from her bio that as a 19-year-old cadet at the U.S. Air Force Academy, Nicole was forced to learn how to live and love differently following a terrifying and transformative near-death experience. Her pursuit of improving her own health led her into a career in the health and wellness field. A disabled veteran, Nicole now maintains a part-time private practice targeting the often overlooked domains of emotional, energy, and spiritual well-being, which I'm really looking forward to speaking with you about today. Nicole, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, Shannon, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this all day long, and I'm
Me
just so
too.
excited to be here and to have this conversation.
Me too. I'm so glad you're up for it. I always like to start my interviews with a bit about your background and where you come from. I know the answer because I've read your book, and it is interesting as it pertains to a spiritually transformative experience. So, just wherever you like, tell us about little Nicole, where she came from, and what your background was and your spiritual upbringing.
Okay. Little Nicole was born just 33 miles from where I live right now at Camp Lejeune, which is a Marine Corps base in North Carolina. And I just moved to New Bern, which I said is just about 30 miles away, 2 years ago after being in Hawaii for almost 20 years. And I grew up in Mississippi, okay, the really deep South. So I have literally in my life come full circle. I mean, geographically, spiritually, in so many ways, I have come full circle in my life. But to actually live 30 miles from where I was born, I never would have predicted that. So, but it's a delightful, charming town, right where the Neuse River and the Trent Rivers meet. So we've been here 2 years now, and just love the history here. So, and the architect is amazing. So if anybody is looking for a trip, come to New Bern. So anyway, I grew up in Mississippi, crossroads of the South, and it's part of the Bible Belt. Okay, so my dad was Baptist, so we went to the Southern Baptist Church with him, and my mother was Lutheran, so we went to the Lutheran church with her. So every Sunday, somebody asked me, well, how did you feel about church? And I said, it was just too much of it, because we were in church all the time. It is a cornerstone. It is a foundation for most families in the South. Their lives pretty much revolve around that, work and school. So it was confusing to me because the Baptist church had rules that were different from the Lutheran church. They did things differently, like how to baptize. You baptize an infant in the Lutheran church, but you're more of a child or an adult in the Baptist church, and they dunk it in the water. And, that's actually the best part of the whole service, was the dunking part. But anyway, it was hellfire and brimstone in the Baptist church. It was very much about a dualistic God. God loved you. He protected you. He was your provider. Jesus was your friend. But yet, on the other hand, God was punitive, judgmental, and the wrath of God would come upon you if you sinned. So you not only had the 10 commandments as rules to follow, you also had other rules that each denomination puts forth. And what that does is it keeps you in fear, okay? Fear that you're never going to be good enough for God, because they even tell you, if you're thinking something bad, then that's a sin. Okay. So there's no way out of that. And I think at a young age, when you're getting indoctrinated into these institutions and you're doing it, every week, it actually becomes a belief system in you that you think when you die, if you haven't been good, that God is going to judge you. And if you don't make the cut, you're going to go to a place called hell. And basically, you're forever separated from your family. And I think that's what scares people the most, is that you won't have your family with you. I know it scared me to think I could be in hell and they could be in heaven, so a lot of fear is generated in order to control you. And the Lutheran Church is more like the Catholic Church, a lot of traditions in it. It's based on Martin Luther's catechism. I did Holy Communion. I did confirmation there. And, it's just, they're different. And so, I think even God is probably confused on what he said, because they're all saying different things. And then through my years, I've gone to other churches, denominations, and they're all saying something different too, but it's, for me, when my near-death experience happened, and then 19 years later, when my memory came back, that all blew up. And it blew up because the God that I experienced on the other side was none of that, except the loving part that I was told. And that was, it blew my mind, and it blew my parents' mind, and it blew my siblings' mind, because they're all convinced that the Bible is the literal translation and this is what's going to happen. And I'm just like, God is not some white man with a beard up in heaven with the gates, the streets are paved with gold, and that you're going to go there and they're going to read to you, all your sins or whatever, judge you somehow. I said, that's a completely false belief system. And my experience was God is love. All I remembered from my near-death experience was bright white light. For 19 years, it's all I remembered. And I remembered asking my surgeon, could I have woken up in the operating room and seen the light? And she said, no, Nicole, you were unconscious and you were out the whole time. So I am here to tell you, in my experience, God is love. And really, when we look at the 10 common lessons from NDEs, which is what I focus on in my book, they're all positive. And love really is all that matters, and is the source of all that exists. So if it's the source of all that exists, then it's God.
Yes. And I hear that from so many near-death experiencers, which makes me happy, because it really does validate my own belief system. I don't have to be right, but this is something I'd like to be right about. So I know that the viewers and listeners will want to know what it was that caused your near-death experience. And I know from, as I said, I'm reading your book, and it hasn't, it's, I've already gotten so much out of it without you even having had to mention what happened when you crossed over. But you had a really difficult time. I know a lot of people do, but yours was was a bad accident. And so share whatever you're comfortable sharing about, if you would, that day.
Sure. When I graduated from high school, I went to the United States Air Force Academy. They had just started admitting women, and the first class was 1980. So my class was 86. So you could tell that I was in one of the first classes of women. It was hell. I'm just going to be honest with you and the audience. A lot of physical abuse, a lot of mental abuse. You're always being told how terrible you are in lots of foul language. It's just they're trying to break you down is what they're doing. And then you start admitting women, and the sexual abuse piece comes into this, and it's unfortunately not gone away. There's still the academies, and the military in general is still dealing with sexual assault and sexual abuse claims. So the reason I went there was because my dad was a grad, and I wanted to be his boy. I am a people pleaser. That's what my identity, my primary identity. I
Me
see
too.
that hand going up.
I'm a recovering people
Yes,
pleaser, but
yes.
yes,
Let me
yes.
say recovering, but I think especially women in the South or just all over, it is really hard not to get out of growing up not taking on that identity, because when you please everyone else, you don't get to know who you are at all. And at the end of the day, you feel like a roach that got stomped on because you didn't get anything out of it. You don't have your own opinions. You don't have your own thoughts. It's whatever they want. And it is very, very pervasive in our culture with women, especially. And so I have 3 other siblings, and I was the one that was stepping up to go to the academy, even though I have 2 brothers. And so I didn't think I was going to get accepted. I mean, you have to get a congressional nomination, you have to pass a physical, you have to do well on your ACTs, you have to pass a mental health test. I mean, it's an arduous process to get selected. And so when I did, I was like, oh shit, now I got to go. I can't pull out of this. And I knew the first 3 weeks in basic training that I was in the wrong place. My soul was in the wrong place. My soul was not meant to kill other people. And ultimately, yes, our military is here to defend our freedoms and defend the United States of America. But you, in order to do that, have to be trained to kill. I was modeling, I was doing junior achievement, I was doing drill team. I wasn't doing anything about airplanes or anything that would remotely deal with the military. So, I was completely there for the wrong reasons. And I struggled through the first year. By the grace of God, it was tough. It really was. And then my sophomore year, it started out, and I knew I needed to get out of there, but dadgummit, Shannon, I couldn't quit. I just could not quit. I think the shame and the humiliation and embarrassment of quitting, I just couldn't do it. And when we had in basic training, we got 1 phone call at 3 weeks. Okay. Didn't have cell phones back then. And I got to call home, and my mother answered the phone, and I cried, hyperventilated for the entire 3 minutes of the phone call. I did not get one word out except hi. And so they said, your 3 minutes is up. And they could tell that I was really upset. So the commander comes over, he goes, go sit over there, Kerr, until you can work it out. And I didn't realize then, but I was having a panic attack is what it was. And I wanted my mother so desperately to give me permission to come home, to quit and say, honey, if this isn't right for you, come home. Your dad and I will be happy to do whatever it takes, but clearly this is upsetting. This isn't what you want to do. And I didn't get any of that. In fact, my mother said to my dad later, what have we done to her? And he said, oh, she'll get over it. And I didn't get over it. Okay. And I think that's the thing, is when your parents don't truly know who you are and your soul. And I'm a sensitive and empathetic child, trying to please, that you will do anything for them to get their love and attention and approval. And to the point of sacrificing myself, my needs, whatever I wanted. And I was totally like, he would tell me what he told all of us kids what we needed to do. And we did it. we didn't say no to him. So the sophomore year, we were at a squadron party, and it was the end of the party and to kick off the new year. And I was getting a ride back with a senior who I didn't know. And I said, do you mind if, I have a ride back? And he's like, nope. So we stopped at a bar. He wanted to have a couple more drinks. He was a senior. And I was worried about getting back to the academy by curfew, which was 7:35. And then he said, do you want a cigarette? And I'm like, oh my goodness. Okay, I'll try a cigarette. I'm going to have some fun. I'm going to break all these rules that my dad had told me, which were no drinking, no cigarettes, no dating upperclassmen. And I'm going to just go with this evening. So the bartender says to him on the way out, are you okay to drive? And he said, yeah. Then he wants to stop and watch the sunset at the rock along the Rocky Mountains. And I had never been on a date, okay, my entire high school career. I was so ignorant about men and agendas regarding sex. I just was completely ignorant. And so didn't know what to do. So I kind of froze and was like, okay, we have to get back. We have to get back. And the last thing I remembered is he turned the ignition. We got back on the road. And then the next moment I woke up in the ICU at Penrose Community Hospital. And what I know now is the reason I know it is because my EMT that was on the scene came to my hospital room 10 weeks later and told me what the story was. Also, the district attorney came and did an interview, and it turned out that I was pronounced dead at the scene. We were in a Corvette convertible, and he started speeding, and his right side of the car, the passenger side, hit a boulder and flipped the Corvette on its top. We were thrown out, pushed the boulder, and a group of bystanders heard it, came over, couldn't get any vitals out of me, put a blanket over me. And by the time the Tri-Lakes Fire Department and the volunteer first responders got there, they said, oh, she's already dead. And this one guy, John Hartling, took the blanket off, and he said, nobody makes that call. I make that call. And he started working the victim. And he did a sternal knuckle press, and my right pupil dilated. And what do we know in spirituality? We would say the eyes are what?
The window to the soul.
That's right. So when my crash happened, my soul flew out of my body as soon as I went up in the air. So I did not crash. I didn't land with my soul in me. It flew out when I was up. It came back in my right eye.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yes. And that's the only sign that he could get in my whole body. Okay. My blood pressure was 60/0. They got me to the hospital. I had multiple fractures. My left foot was cut off. They just was hanging on by about that much skin. Broken pelvis. It's all detailed in the book, all the extent of my injuries. And I just had an amazing team of healthcare providers, and I call them my angels. And I talk about them in the book because I went and interviewed them 25 years later. And it was so funny because I'm tall, I'm 5'11", and they had always seen me in the bed. They'd never seen me stand up. So when I met them in Colorado Springs, they were like, oh, you're so tall. That was the first thing they noticed. But I wound up interviewing them. They all remembered my case. I was in the hospital 4 months, 6 major surgeries. And then it was time to be transferred home. And I basically resorted back to an infant. I couldn't walk. I couldn't urinate or my bowels. I couldn't operate them on my own. I had, my wrist was severed, my foot. So I was just having to heal from all of this. And, my mother and I got very codependent during that time because she had to do everything for me. And so the doctor did say, I think Nicole needs some mental health help. She's been through a severe trauma. And my mother said to her that God and Jesus were our psychiatrist and psychologist, and that we didn't need that. And that was not true. I did need mental health because as soon as I went to live with my sister, they thought I would be better off living with her and trying to go back to school at a junior college. I developed an eating disorder, a compulsive eating as it was known back then. And I was in so much emotional pain and I didn't understand why. And so I would just shove food in my mouth. And unfortunately, that lasted almost 20 years. Even though I knew a couple of years into it that something was wrong here, it took me getting married basically for that all to come to a head and me to recover from that. And I'm, I became a dietitian. And who did I cancel, Shannon? Others with eating disorders, anorexic, bulimia. I think a lot of times we go into fields because we want to fix ourselves. So I went into nutrition and thinking it was a food issue, and it wasn't. It was so much psychological and pain and family dysfunction, because my parents actually blamed me for the wreck that I broke my dad's rules. I had alcohol, I smoked, and I was with another cadet. And when my father heard that while I was talking to the district attorney, he was disgusted. He just walked out of the hospital room, and I started dry heaving and throwing up, because I would have almost rather been dead than to have to face his disgust of, of what happened. And it's been a long journey. The next 20 years, after my memory came back, of trying to align myself with my spirit, my soul, my body, because I was cut off from here. I did not embody emotions. I thought emotions. I thought, yeah, anger is the appropriate emotion in this situation. So I think I'm angry at you. But I didn't embody it. It just got cut off. And that's the way I lived my life for a long time. And until physically it starts showing up. And that's the thing with emotions. If you do not deal with them, they will start manifesting in physical dis-ease. And the doctors will not be able to figure out a reason for it, an organic reason for it. And I mean, it's happened to me, and I've worked with other people on it. You'll develop symptoms and signs that they're like, I don't know what it is, but your lab tests are all normal, So emotions are a huge part of recovery, especially from trauma. And America is really illiterate when it comes to emotions. Most of us grew up learning bad, sad, mad, and glad. But there is a huge buffet of them. But in the South, what we don't want to do is get angry, usually, or hurt anybody. And we don't like confrontation. And so you definitely don't hurt your mama. So it's been a long, long journey. And I physically recovered very well. They didn't think I would walk again, but then it became the journey of healing my mind and my spirit. I actually went through a soul retrieval that my soul, part of it fractured when the accident happened. And as a means of self-protection, part of it just escaped. So that was in 2019 when I worked with a shaman on that piece. And since then, the spiritual piece of wellness to me has become the most important. And that's the connection with your soul. And growing up, the only thing I remember about our soul was that it was going to hell if we were bad, or soul music, I didn't know what my soul was. And so developing that relationship is really important, because you learn not to trust yourself. You learn you cannot make good decisions. And that really stunts you. It stunts your self-esteem. It stunts your self-love. when you can't rely on your own sense of self to trust. You're always dependent on somebody else knowing better for you what you need. And that's the way I grew up. So, this journey of a spiritual transformative experience, it's been my whole adult life, and I know on the other side of the veil that time is not linear. Time can be compressed to a second, our whole, maybe 90 years. But it has been, I feel like an Israelite that's been in the wilderness for 40 years, trying to figure out, manage, and understand what I was told on the other side when my memory did come back, which was to tell people not to be afraid of death. Because if you're in fear, first of all, fear is a low vibration. Okay. If you're in fear, you're going to lose your clarity. And in order to regain your clarity, you got to address your fears. And so that's what my mission now, or it's a vocation. It's not even an occupation. It's a vocation, is we need to start addressing our fears around the subject of death. We in this nation have a very negative way of approaching death. In most books you read, it's about doom and gloom. Okay. Think about Halloween, the images that go with the casket and Dracula, and it just scares the wee out of the little ones, and so my mission is to try to change the culture and the way we talk about death, and to bring it more into conversation growing up from a little age, to include children, because death is not just reserved for older people. Children die, teens die. I know my nephew's friend, 21 years old, overdosed on fentanyl. It happens, and we're not prepared for it. We don't prepare our children for it. And it needs to be a discussion that, what do you believe in? And that gets to your concept of God. And if you have a belief system of God being judgmental and punitive, and you go to hell, that is going to scare you. And if you're scared, then you're not going to truly be living your life. And death is going to be scary for you. And death is absolutely beautiful. It is, it's just, I can say so many things wonderful about it, and that's where these 10 common lessons that I share in my book, we're never alone. We're never judged. Can you exhale on that? We're never judged. We didn't make a mistake. How many times have we all just beat ourselves up when we are judged for having made a mistake or blamed? So I know that when my car crash happened, among other things, that soul part left me, and that soul loss. So people, that is a real thing. And, you may ask me, well, how did you know about that? And it's like, well, I didn't want to be here. I knew when I was on the other side, I didn't want to come back to that body. I could see my body. It was laying in a ditch. I had my teal-colored Azad shirt on and my khaki shorts. I still remember how I looked that day. And I didn't want to go back into that body because I knew the pain and suffering that were going to come along with it. But I was told that I was going to go back, and my mission was to tell people to not be afraid of death. And I'm thinking, well, that's a pretty big mission. And then I'm hearing other voices. I'm not in a human form. I hear other voices talking about they need to ask us for help. And I'm thinking, they meaning Earth, us humans, need to ask the angelic realm for help, that they're not going to intervene unless they are asked to help. Only will they intervene if it's an emergency, such as my case. Otherwise, they're going to stay out of the situation because of something called free will. So another way you can tell if you have soul loss is you have this low level, consistent feeling that something is missing in your life. It's kind of like a depression. And it's interesting to note that many compulsive behaviors or addictions actually fall into this statement. And for me, I can clearly see the link now between compulsive eating and my feelings of emptiness. And then the last criteria is you can't get over it. You just can't get over it, And for me, that manifested in like a chronic wasting illness. I could never put on weight. I was always a BMI of about 18, and it was just, I was always on that borderline. If I lost any more weight, it was just, my health just went. So I would tell people to explore that option if they're not getting better with what they're doing, because especially if it's a trauma, your sex abuse, any of that kind of stuff, your parts of your soul will fracture as a means of self-protection.
Absolutely. And that's why I really appreciate how you talk about trauma and how it stays in your cells. The body keeps the score. It's something that so many people don't want to confront. In fact, a friend of mine was just dating a guy who locally had this horrible car accident, and he was in a coma. His friend unfortunately passed away, and he was driving and he was in a coma, wouldn't go to therapy, just wouldn't, was like, nope, I'm just going to move on with my life. I said, I'm just going to pray that eventually he gets there, because this is going to end up disastrous. And it did with their relationship, but also just it. I think, especially, I think, like you said, our society doesn't. It's getting better. We're moving towards a lot of talk about trauma and therapy, now it's almost like a badge of honor. But there are still parts of the society that don't, or and a lot of men were not raised that
Right,
way. And so I see a lot of men in my life that have serious trauma, and they're just going, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. But they're not fine.
right.
They're showing it in all these, it comes out, it's like a whack-a-mole. It just pops up in all these different areas. So I really appreciated you speaking about that. Um, and yeah, I was going to ask you to just share a little bit, if you would, um, along the lines of what you were just saying, but what does happen if we don't confront the trauma? What are I mean, besides, illness is one of them. I've experienced that. What does that look like?
Um, Depression, anxiety, PTSD, um, uh, your nervous system is constantly on high alert. Okay. That is really bad for you from a physical perspective. Okay. Because you're reacting out of the part of your brain called your amygdala, which is where it's fight, flight,
Mhm.
freeze, that part. You're not operating here, which is where we need to be, which is your prefrontal cortex. And that makes all your executive decisions. So this part of your brain is going to hijack this part of your brain every single time, because this part's going to keep you safe, you think. So what you have to do is become aware. And that's the hardest thing, is to break these unconscious belief systems that you have and become aware of how they're sabotaging you. And you're never going to get what you want as long as that loop is playing.
Right.
And so usually that takes help in the form of someone doing EMDR, tapping, Neuro Emotional Technique. Some of these newer techniques, well, they're not new. They've been around for a long time, but they're getting more exposure because they're helping you get at the unconscious part, which is really, running the show. Only about 5% of our daily life is run consciously. The rest
Right.
is on this loop that we learned a long time ago. So when you come up against something that triggers you present day, like you see an ex-boyfriend and you didn't resolve the relationship, you're going to get triggered. Oh my gosh, what's he going to do? What's going to happen? And then you think about, what he called you, names he called you, just all that flashback starts happening, and you never talked back, or you never stood up for yourself, and still don't. So it's almost like you want to run and hide from them, instead of dealing with it, basically. But, I think trauma unresolved is what I see in my parents' generation. When they don't resolve their trauma, they pass it on to us, because basically they were told to just get over it. And they didn't get the mental health they needed back then, whether it was, an alcoholic father, or like my mother came from World War II in Germany, seeing all kinds of people dead and bombs, like the Ukraine is right now. That's traumatic. It is traumatic to witness somebody being shot, whether just in a simple shooting here at a grocery store, or, in a war. And so my mother never dealt with that. She just went on in life. And then she had my accident to deal with, which traumatized her, because every day she didn't know if I was going to be alive or dead. I was on a roller coaster for 4 months in the hospital, 7 weeks in ICU, 2 more code blues. I mean, it was rough. I was really not wanting to be here. I tried to go back a couple of more times. So they don't understand your trauma, because they just got over it and think you should too. And that is not helping anybody. So you've got to do the work on yourself, so you don't pass it on to the next generation, and also relieve the pain from yourself.
Right. Yeah. And I also wanted to talk about something else you just said, about how we really have there's a taboo around death. Um, Partly why I do this podcast as well is to help hopefully minimize that fear that people have. And of course, it also is dependent on their belief system. If you don't believe there's anything, that is scary.
Mhm.
And if you believe there's something, but you don't know what it is, that can be scary too. And admittedly, I'm not afraid of death, but I love my life. I love this incarnation and I've gone through my own challenges and addiction recovery, and my own fight or flight mind body issue that I have from prolonged anxiety. But I am very attached to this world and this life and the people in it. I know once I cross over you know, push myself over the edge, it'll be beautiful. I'm not afraid of it. But it is hard for us to imagine not being attached to these bodies and these people and this world. So I really commend you for bringing that to the surface. But just, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that in general. And really, I don't have a question as much as food for thought, just sort of a conversation starter.
Well, we always have to remember, and this is hard, that we're human and we're spiritual. Okay. So the human part of us, of course, when someone dies, you're going to have grief and loss and all of these emotions that come up with that person. And we need to be compassionate, and we need to hold that for them as well. But the bigger picture of where we go, and the benevolence, and the greater part, this isn't our soul's first time to incarnate. Sorry to tell you guys that. This is, your soul has this long trajectory, okay? And it will continue to go on. And that's when I said in the book, you are deathless. That's what I meant. Your physical body, yes, it decays, it dies. But as soon as you die, your soul, that vapor, that breath, escapes. And that is your light. That is your beauty. That is your love. That is all these wonderful things that so many of us have forgotten how to have a relationship with. And I call that spiritual amnesia. We have just forgotten, because we've had so many filters put on us over the decades. This is what you should believe. This is not what you should believe. And it's just been confusing. And everyone has to come to their own version of a concept of God. And in my book, I actually spend a lot of time talking about how I grew up with the vending machine concept, where you put in the good behavior and you should get out, you punch Coca-Cola, you should get a Coke out. It doesn't work like that. Sometimes a Mountain Dew comes out, sometimes nothing comes out. But the problem is that always comes back to you did something wrong, right? You must have done something wrong to put whatever you put in the machine. And that is just not true. When I was doing my counseling, I had a little 6-year-old girl doing the Neuro Emotional Technique, and she was very scared. She was in a evangelical church, and she was very scared of hell because she didn't want to be separated from her family. She was already adopted, but she didn't want to be separated. It was scaring her, and it was causing her to run into her parents' bedroom at night. Okay. And when I asked her how she sees God, she eagerly told me, I love this. God is a blue spirit with colors and balloons in all different colors, no head, and can talk. Clearly, this little girl is still having a direct experience with God, no filters from any other people involved. And her understanding inspires me because the white light that almost every NDE experiencer has in common, when you think about white as a color, all other colors are absorbed by white, right? And on the other side, there's more colors than the 64 colors in the Crayola box, okay? There's colors you can't, I can't remember them because I can't remember that part, but there were other colors. And they're all blended into the white. So when I talk about the white light and the white tunnel, I see that as being, I was in this cocoon of this light, just being held and being supported and being loved more than anything I knew. And it was like a chrysalis around me, To me, that is God. There's nowhere God is not. And when I think about all those colors being blended and her coming up with that statement, I'm like, I think that's kind of all delving into the same road. It's that energy.
That's so beautiful. I love that. It doesn't fit into anything other than it's a feeling, it's colors, it's lights, it can be music, it's
Yeah.
everything we're all made of. It's the stuff we're all made of. And I find that so comforting and exciting, which is why I used to binge watch near-death experience videos before I started this podcast, because there's just life can be really hard. But when you
Yeah.
know that this is not all there is, it doesn't mean you won't feel grief or stress. I find I've been having panic attacks for 2 weeks and I'm still happy. I'm still
Yeah.
human. I still have anxiety. My brain is always in fight or flight. It's been a thing my whole life. And I do what I can to manage it. But at the end of the day, knowing there's this greater thing, that really this is just a play, a stage play that we're all kind of acting out together,
Mm-hmm.
that gives me a big sense of relief. When you crossed over and your soul jetted out of your body, and you were enveloped in this light, did you see beings, or was it more of a telepath? Like all of the stuff you're telling us now about how the other side works, and I know that you're not claiming to know everything, but when we say things like, because it's what you're saying is what every other NDE experiencer has told me too, for the most part. Um, it's I believe it now, and I know it, and I'm able to answer these questions myself when people ask me. I have such a better understanding of the universe and what's going on. How did you receive that information? I know that it was a long process and a memory recovery process, but how was it that you, Nicole, received the knowing and the understanding?
Well, I wrote in the book, it's like Casper the ghost. Okay. Casper is invisible. Okay. When you look at Casper, but I wrote this book, it was published in August. And interestingly enough, in August, my grandfather had died at age 58, and I'm 58 now. And my grandfather came to me and one night and said, I was the angel that brought you back. because you knew angels from Sunday school. I knew about the archangels, and I knew about, supposedly, the good angels and bad angels, but I knew angels, and I felt safe with angels. So he came in the form of an angel and retrieved me. And I was just like, oh my gosh, because I didn't really know my grandfather that well, but he waited until August, the year he died at such a young age from a massive heart attack, to let me know that it was him. And it's also been my work working with spirit guides and angels and developing the dialogue, to learn to trust that dialogue, because I think with so much of this, people come back with, well, that's your memory, and your memory's flawed, and you had a head injury, so how can you trust your memory? And you get this when you tell people you've been sexually abused, 40 years later, and people go, well, it's the whole memory thing. How do you trust your memory? Which is terrible, because why would anybody make this stuff up? It's all really painful stuff. But yes, he came and he lifted me. I always had said it was a he. I knew that much. And I knew it was this form, like Casper, of a spirit, and took me up in terms of a direction. And then I was with other spirits that I could hear. I don't know if they were speaking English or whatever, but I could understand the conversation. And that's why I said there's really two messages here. Please ask your angelic realm for support, for help. And please, do not be afraid of death. Because if you are, you're not going to truly live. And that is what we were born to do. I really truly believe that we come here as a journey to learn love. Right now, we're not doing so good with that. I don't think, with our situation in terms of loving Mother Earth, loving all sentient beings, and loving each other, regardless of race, creed, sex, gender, religion. And what happens to us happens as our soul's way of stretching us to expand our ability to love. So to me, that's the most important reason we're all here.
Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. I know what you mean when you say that the way that you receive the information is, it's like a language. You're not hearing individual words necessarily. It's just sort of a knowing, understanding. It's telepathy. It's how I
Yes.
communicate with spirit, which
Yeah.
sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but that's, I
But
always,
we're
I
all
know,
energy,
right,
and that's why I can work with you if you give me permission to enter your energy field,
right.
and work with you. And that's how, Reiki and a lot of these other things work as well. Because your energy, everything and everyone is connected. And that should have been very obvious to most of us when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
But do you think we learned from it?
Things are
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we have a lot to do in terms of evolving. And I think people like yourself and myself that have been through these really difficult journeys in life, a lot of challenges, we're light workers, we're bridge workers. We are bridging the old with the new, because those belief systems are starting to crash down. And people are looking for answers. They're not looking for pills, our generation. They don't want a narcotic to fix them. They want, cannabis or CBD, and you're seeing things shift with that becoming legal. We're not going to be put away in nursing homes like our grandmothers were and just locked away. We are going to have more say in how we pass. And I will say, this book covers a lot. It is not just about an NDE. The NDE was the spark that uncovered my dysfunctional family in terms of my parents are religious addicts. And it is truly, you cannot ever win an argument with someone who is a religious addict, because God is always the top reason that they do or do not do something. The responsibility is, well, God told me to do that, or God said this to me, or whatever. So it's really been challenging for me to have to let go of both of my parents, but I have had to do it because I get migraines. I get sick when I get around them. And every time I get off the phone, I feel hurt.
Yeah.
And I want people to really start listening to conversations that they have with people. And if people are shaming them, blaming them, judging them, criticizing them, they are not people that have your best interest. Okay. They are pushing your vibration down. Okay. And that to me is abusive. And so I really hope that you can start pulling yourself out of that, even if it's your family of origin, because it doesn't change unless you change it.
Thank you. You know, I could ask you 25 more questions, but I feel like this is actually a great place to end because you've delivered so much insight. And I really want people to read your book because there's, as you said, there's a lot more in there. And you've just demonstrated why I enjoy this book because the way you speak, the way you think, the way that you put words together, I really it's an easy read, but it's thought at every paragraph, no paragraph is wasted. There's something in every paragraph, and that's what I really enjoy is the way that you word things. It's simple, it's concise, and yet it has there's a lot of insight in there that's really valuable and really relatable, at least to me. And I would love for people to read the book, but I just want to thank you so much for being here and sharing all of what you did. I could, like I said, I could talk to you for another 10 hours, but just for in the interest of being, again, as concise to the point as your book, I'd like to end it here. But I would like you to share anything that you'd like about things that are coming up for you, services, book stuff. And
Yes.
of course, we'll put all your links below, but just anything you'd like to plug or share.
Yeah, I want to tell people at the end of the book, there is actually a fear checklist. So, what fears you may experience regarding your own death. And that is a great checklist to do just on your own or with a book group. I actually have suggested book club questions, and I think it would be fascinating. You would definitely get to know your book club members on a really intimate level if you could bring up this and discuss how they really feel about it. And if I can work it with your time zone, I will actually zoom in on your book club discussion for 20 to 30 minutes and talk to you about any questions that you may have for me. So I am willing to give myself my time to help you with that. And the other thing is, this isn't for people who are just dying. This is for everybody, because we're all going to die. And if you're looking for a gift, it costs as much as a venti frappuccino.
It does.
Okay,
Yeah.
$9.99.
$99. Yeah.
Yeah, it is transformative, and the work that you do to become spiritually transformed, it is not an easy path, but stick to it and you will become free and the being that you were created to be.
Amen. That was my prayer, my yes praise hands. Thank you so much, Nicole Kerr,
My
for being here
pleasure.
with me today. Again, the book is called You Are Deathless. A near-death experience taught me how to fully live and not fear death. This has been such a pleasure. You are a fabulous person.
Thank
Endless
you.
gratitude. Thank you.
Same to you, Shannon. It's been a pleasure.